I am going to continue in this toolbox series that we've been in. We've had a little bit of a break here and there, but we're back in, and so I'm grateful to be speaking, and I'm grateful to kind of share a little bit of what I've learned about the storms of my life. And so if you're taking notes, tonight's topic will be your title. You can write down, Jesus Calms the Storm. We're going to be reading out of Mark chapter 4, verse 35 through 41. And it goes, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side,' leaving the crowd behind. They took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" And so I just remember that I'm the one that's supposed to be doing the clicking, so sorry guys. Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture. Here we go. This is a painting that Rembrandt, he was a famous painter, artist, that he painted in the 1600s about the story that we just read. And it's Jesus in the storm with the disciples. He didn't paint the aftermath of the storm when Jesus calmed it. He painted it at its probably most trivial, hardest time that they were going through. Not trivial, but the hardest time. And so when you're looking at the picture, you might wonder how many people are in the boat, and you would maybe think, well, it's Jesus and his disciples, so there's 13 people. But actually there's 14 people in this picture because Rembrandt painted himself in the painting. He painted himself because he wanted to know what it would be like if he put himself in there and thought through that. Like, if I was in that boat, what would my reaction have been in this storm with Jesus? And so going off that, he said, what would I look like in this scene? What would I be doing? What would I be feeling? And honestly, that really challenged me, because it made me stop and ask myself, well, what would I be doing? And so we'll talk about that in a little bit, some of the things I've learned. But in this picture, you're going to see in the back of the boat, there is a small group that's gathered at Jesus' feet. And I know this picture is kind of dark, but here's Jesus, and there is a group that are right there at his feet, and they have their eyes fixed on him. There's a calm about them in this picture. There's even a kind of a light shining on Jesus that Rembrandt painted, and that light's kind of pulling off onto those that are around him and that are near him. So they're also in the light. Now there's another group of people that are harder to see, and they're in the darkness. You see there's a man here, and he has himself overboard a little bit. He's looking at the waves. He's looking at the sea, and there's some of the people in the darkness. And so this is the second group of people that Rembrandt painted. Their eyes are not on Jesus. I mean, point blank, he literally has his back to Jesus in this picture. And so they're focused on the elements. They're focused on the wind and the waves. Their eyes are not on him. And so fear consumes them. Darkness surrounds them in this picture. And that's what happens with us. And then there's the third group, and they're up at the other end of the boat here. And that's the ones over here. And they're fighting the storm. They're actively fighting the elements. These are probably light experienced fishermen. They're fighting the storm with everything they have, trying to keep the boat from sinking. And when Rembrandt painted this, he painted Peter among them, straining with all of his strength. And so I think many of us can identify with Peter in this painting. If we just try harder, if we just work harder, if we control more, that maybe we can survive the storm that we're facing. In the painting that you'll see, there's another light that's kind of on the fisherman, and that light is the break of the storm. So the storm is breaking, and there's a light coming through the clouds, and Peter has his back to that light. And that's what happens to us sometimes. When we fight in our own strength, we become oblivious to the light that Jesus gives us. We only see the darkness. Now, Rembrandt painted John a little bit differently. He is near Jesus, looking toward the light. And he's relying on him. And so, like I said, when I first saw this painting and I read about it, it really made me stop and ask myself, if I were in the boat, where would I be? Would I be with Jesus? Would I be focused on the elements, the wind and the waves, and not with my back to him? Would I be fighting with everything I had against the elements, but also keeping my eyes off of Jesus and in my own strength? So I'm going to share tonight some of my own storms, the things I've learned and what I'm still learning. But before I do, I always, like Pastor Joel says, you want to learn and pull from it, the passage, to pull up some application. And so the next part is the storm and the question. So two of the least controllable forces in the world are wind and waves. Even with modern technology, we can monitor and we predict storms, but we cannot control them. And for those of us, we all live in Florida, we know this. Like if there's a hurricane coming, like we can prepare all we want, but we cannot control the wind and the waves. So those on the coast know this too. The waves were already hitting the boat. Water was already coming in the story that we read. And Jesus, well, he's sleeping on the boat. And the disciples wake him up and they said, "Don't you care if we drown? Don't you care?" And if you listen closely to that question, I hear feelings in it. Like their feelings are right there on the surface. You can hear frustration in their question. You can hear fear in their question. They didn't question his power. They questioned his care, his love for them. And if you hear it with emotion, you can kind of put yourself in the boat. That's what I really did, is when I reread this passage, I stopped and I read this passage thinking through the sound of it. You're out in the sea, and there is a massive storm, and the waves are pounding. And if you've ever been even on a cruise ship at night, you know how loud it can get. The waves crashing into each other. The wind is hurling, or whatever word howling. I originally had whipping, and I said, does wind whip? It's howling. The boat, it's wooden, most likely. It's creaking. It's making noise. There's a lot of noise happening in this storm, and the environment is really loud. And so when the disciples asked Jesus, "Do you even care?" it's not like this polite question really quietly. Like they were yelling, I'm sure. They're yelling, "Don't you care?" And here's Jesus just sleeping. And I'm guessing if we're honest, we've probably all asked the same question to Jesus. God, don't you see? Don't you care? Where are you? But let's work backward. Did Jesus know the storm was coming? Yes, he did. It was part of the lesson that he was going to be teaching the disciples. Did he have to be in the boat? Nope, he didn't. In fact, the story tells us that there were other boats out there. Jesus is Jesus. He could have managed to get to the other side a different way. He could have ridden in another boat, but he chose to ride in their boat because he loved them and he did care for them. So he chose to be in the boat. He knew that they were going to be afraid. They were going to be afraid, and he cared. He stood up and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and they obeyed. And this wasn't ordinary. It isn't ordinary now. If this were to happen today, it would still not be ordinary. He mastered nature in the biggest way possible. When we are in storms, we often doubt three things. We would doubt God's goodness, we doubt God's timing, and we doubt God's attention. And that's what they did in this one sentence when they said, "Don't you care?" They doubted all of those things. But Jesus, he was resting, not because he didn't care, but because he was confident in the outcome. He was peaceful. He wasn't panicked, and he wasn't pacing. And so a good reminder for you is your storm may be loud, but heaven is not frantic. After calming the storm, Jesus gently rebukes them. The greatest danger wasn't in the wind. It wasn't in the waves. It was in the unbelief of the disciples. Sometimes our greatest problems are not around us, they are within us. He said, men of little faith. He wasn't saying that to be mean, but he was saying it because they had been hearing him teach the word. They had just been with him as he taught the parables. They had seen him perform miracles, and honestly, fear right there exposed what they truly believed in that moment. Again, please don't miss that this whole thing happened because Jesus had a plan to teach. This was a test. And we sometimes learn better in action. The hearing of God's word is intended to produce faith, and faith always must be tested. That's Romans 10:17. You can find that. And it says, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. It's not enough for us to just learn a lesson or be able to repeat back a teaching that we hear. We must be able to practice the lesson by faith. And this is why God permits trials to come into our life. Storms reveal our faith. So there was that was the question they asked. Don't you care if we drown? There was a purpose on the other side. So Jesus said, let us go to the other side. So they're on one side of the lake, the Sea of Galilee. They want to get to the other side. And on the other side was the region of Gerasenes. That's how I'm going to say it. Where he would deliver a man who had been demon-possessed and tormented. So when they're in the storm, on this passage we just read, what they don't know is they're going to go to the other side where they're going to heal somebody who's been being demon-possessed and tormented. There was purpose on the other side that was waiting them. There was someone's deliverance on the other side. There was freedom on the other side. So the storm you are in might not have anything to do with you personally, outside of it's someone else's freedom waiting on the other side of your obedience. If the enemy can stop you in the storm, he can delay what's waiting on the other side of your obedience. Sometimes the storm isn't proof you're off course. Sometimes it's proof that something significant is ahead. The presence of a storm doesn't mean the absence of God. If Jesus is in your boat, the storm may shake you, but it cannot sink you. So I want to share with you a little bit about my storms that I've gone through in my life. Like Rembrandt, I asked myself, what would I look like in this boat? And if I'm honest, I've been in all of the 3 different places in the boat that he painted the disciples to be. And so I asked for some help on this. What would it look like if I was in the boat? And so AI really helped me out with this. So here's me now in the boat. And some of the things I wrote on there is the storms that I've been through. Some of the storms are things that my family has been through, and I've still been on the boat through those storms. And so I won't share about all of it, but I will share about a lot of them. But these storms, I kind of looked at it like the waves were my storm when I made this picture. The boat's my life, and it's the journey I'm on, but the waves are what I have fought, actively am fighting. So keep moving here. So, nope, I'm supposed to keep that up actually. So the first storm that I had was my dad. My dad was an alcoholic. He left me when I was 3. He had just his own demons that he was battling, and it won. And he was an angry drunk, and my mom kind of had to get to a point where to protect us, she left. And so pretty much I didn't have any more contact with him until I was about 5. My mom was a single mom. She was in nursing school and she needed some help. And so he at this point had kind of presented himself that he was doing much better and he was sober and he was willing to help. So I was going to go live with him for a year while she finished up her last year of school. And in that year, I was starting kindergarten. And honestly, you know, when you're 5, you don't really have memories of much before that. So for me, this was me living with a stranger. During that time, I lived with him. I was very sad. That's where my memories start. I have memories of being in this little preschool, just crying. I missed my mom, and I didn't know where I was. And my dad showed the same things come back up. He was still drinking, and he still was an alcoholic, and he still was angry. And I'm dealing with it now as a little child who doesn't know him, and my mom is not there. So after some time, my school let my mom know that I wasn't okay, and so my mom took me back, and I got back into the environment I was supposed to be. And honestly, I really didn't have much interaction with him again until I was about 10 or 11. When I'm 10 or 11, he's now moved to Tennessee. He's in a much better place again. He's remarried. He has a family. He's doing really well. Everything looks great. He has a beautiful home in Chattanooga. And so he asked if I want to come stay with him for the summer, and he would come pick me up and take me. And so I said, sure. This is a time of your life when you're 10 or 11 where you're starting to realize all your friends have dads and you don't. And so it was a great beginning to our trip. We had a great car ride going back. I remember to this day the music that was in the car, wind in my face, kind of driving there. It was like this great moment of everything I had been missing. I felt like the Lord was giving me back. But after a week, it all presented itself back again, the exact same stuff. And I ended up having to leave that after I was supposed to be with him for the summer. I stayed for a week, and I ended up going back to stay with his sister's house until I could get back home. And so honestly, that continued until throughout the next 4 or 5 years. I would go and stay with my aunts over the summer, and at this point he was homeless, and they would go find him and bring me to him and try to help me sober him up. And, you know, they would kind of use me to help, praying that it would help him stop doing what he was doing. And so it was a really pivotal time for me to have to carry that weight. And so that continued pretty much on and off until he passed away when I was 22. And he ended up overdosing, and he died. And it was kind of weird because there was a sense of peace for me about it, because he had battled for so long, and I knew that he believed in Jesus. I knew he believed Jesus died on the cross for him. So there was a peace for me that I knew he was with Jesus, and I believe that he was finally not tormented anymore. So going back to me being around like 9 or 10, at that time, my mom ended up getting remarried to my stepdad. My stepdad and I had a very not good relationship. I shared with you the last time I was up here that he is the one who led me to the Lord. And so I will always be grateful for that, because he gave me my greatest gift. But he had never been a dad. He didn't know what that looked like. And he emotionally just was still very immature. And he spoke a lot of things into me and over me that really just harmed me. And so we didn't have a good relationship. As a teenager, you know, you're really cautious of the things and the appearance of things. And so he had a cleft lip. He had a speech impediment. He was deaf. He was bald. He was really, really white. I mean, this man didn't look like somebody that I was like, yay. And so this was not his fault. This was my own issues with him. And it just, honestly, I resented him because I still hadn't healed from what I had gone through with my dad. And so our relationship, honestly, was very, very toxic until he passed away when I was 24. So within 2 years, I lost both of those father figures. This storm really created a deep insecurity in me. There's no really other word for it. The things that were spoken, the actions that were done, the choices that were made, it just really created just such insecurity in me. And that insecurity led me to my own storms that I created out of those insecurities. And so the first one is I met my husband when I was 16, and we met at church. And the church was one that his family went to and my family went to, and we both met there. And honestly, he was a godsend in my life. To this day, I don't know how I was ever gifted him. He was the most stable person in my life, and to this day has been the most stable person in my life on earth, right? I truly had never known anyone like this in my life, and so it was a huge blessing to me. He was a lot older than me, and so that relationship did begin as friends, and then eventually it turned into boyfriend, girlfriend. He was finishing the police academy around the same time that I was supposed to be graduating high school. And the first choice that I made out of insecurity is I had been at a really great high school that was Christian. My mom paid a lot of money for me to go there. And the senior year, they have this project where you have to write a report on the book of Romans. That's the whole Bible project, the whole last year of high school. And I said, I'm not smart enough to do that. I'll never pass. I'm going to fail my senior year. I don't want to do that. So I quit. I just quit the school, and I decided to go to a public school. And by the way, don't ever encourage someone to do that their senior year, because you don't know anybody. And so at a very pivotal time for me to be with my friends and make memories, I was in an environment where I didn't know anybody. And so I didn't like that, so I quit, and I got my GED. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that, but the problem is that I chose the easy routes every time, what was easy, and so I would quit. The church that we met at this exact time decided, or they didn't decide, but there was a big scandal that happened. The pastor had an affair, there was money stolen, and it was just a huge mess. So his family goes off with the old pastor and his wife, and my family decides they're going to stay back at the old church with the new leadership. And so this whole situation just creates a part of me and Brian where we said, we don't want any of it. And so we stopped going to church. And so then we basically get to my second bad decision, which is out of insecurity, Brian gets a job on the other side of Florida, over in Delray Beach, if anybody's familiar with that. And he's first-year police officer over there, and instead of me staying here and waiting till I'm older and more mature and ready, well, if I don't go with him, he's going to find someone else. So we get married at 18, and off we go to the other side of the state. And so for 2 years, we were over there. This started our marriage in a major deficit because I was very immature still. I was unhealed. There was just a lot of things that I hadn't worked through, that I hadn't healed from. And so we had to work full time to make ends meet. It just wasn't a good start for us. And so we ended up moving back to the Tampa area. And then the next storm that happened is another one that I created. And this was the biggest one I created out of my own insecurity. And I did it in a matter of weeks. I decided that I didn't want to be abandoned again. And all of a sudden I had this idea that if I didn't leave him, he was going to leave me. And so I just left my marriage, and I moved out. I got in a different relationship, and that was it. And that's a whole nother story that I have shared before. And I'll just summarize that the Lord was involved, because after 4 months, I returned back home and I knew what I did was wrong. And only the Lord could have allowed him to forgive me for something like that. And only the Lord could allow us 30 years later this year to still be married, thankfully. And we got stronger from it all. It's only God. But in that, we had stopped going to church. We had stopped going to church back with what had happened. And so my eyes were completely off Jesus during all of this time. My eyes were on the world. My eyes were on my friendships. My eyes were on voices and things were speaking into me that were the wrong things. When I was gone from my husband to deal with my guilt and the shame that I was feeling while I was gone, I turned to the same thing that my dad did. And that was the thing I said I would never do. I would never want it to be like my dad. But in that time, I ended up turning to the same things. Thankfully, in my return, though, our marriage did get stronger, and we ended up becoming new parents. And so we ended up walking into a much better season and phase of our life. We had my two oldest girls, Caitlin and Emma. Life was good. But like I shared before, both of my father figures have both died during this time. So there's birth happening, and then there's also a lot of death happening. But because we're new parents, we had made decisions that we were going to get our lives back with the Lord. We were going to get back in church. And so we moved to Wesley Chapel in 2004. We built a house right over here in Bridgewater. It was a brand new community. It hadn't even been broken in yet. And we got involved with a very new startup church. And it really was the first time that we had truly gotten planted in a church since what had happened. I got hired in on the church. I was the secretary for the pastor. We had worked with our youth ministry there. Brian and I both had been placed into that position. And so it was a really good time. The church was very new, but it was growing, and we had a lot of families involved in the church, and all of our friends really came out of that church too. We truly started to give our lives back to the Lord, and we were in a very healthy spiritual place. But then we found out it happened again. Our pastor had had an affair. That was my boss. He left his family, and he had a mental breakdown. And it was much harder this time to deal with because we were a front row. It was our friends. It was people we truly cared a lot about, and we could see all the hurt that was really involved. We pushed through for a while, and we kept doing our thing with the youth ministry. There had been someone else that really wanted that youth ministry, and a lot of church politics happened, and it just came to a point where it wasn't worth what we were fighting. And so we prayed about it, and we really felt like the Lord was calling us out of that church. And we said this time we were not going to handle it the way we did the last time. We were not going to even skip a beat. We were going to go right into another church. And so the Lord brought us right here to Bridgeway the very next week. And it's been 16 years. The Lord is good, and the rest is history with that. And so, for us, though, that was a really hard time. Hurt isn't even a good word to describe it all, because we didn't just lose our church. We lost my job. We lost almost all of our friends at that time period, and we did life together. We all had kids, and so it was really hard. But this is a good reminder that a storm is a setup for what's on the other side. So that's what it was. That storm led to the setup, which is that we ended up here at Bridgeway. And honestly, that's a whole cool story that I'll have to share another time of how God brought us here. And I'm always thankful that we went through that. So thankful that we went through that storm, because it truly changed my life. Before this last storm had come, I had just had Casey, my youngest. And it was right before that church had all the chaos that we were going through. I started to have something that I had never experienced before, and that was panic attacks. I had never had one before, and the first one that hit me, I went straight to the ER because I was confident I was having a heart attack. And this started as a few bad days that mentally took control over me, but it ended up leading to a season that I couldn't leave my house because I was so petrified of the next panic attack. I probably was averaging 5 to 6 every day, if not more. No one was really talking about anxiety back then. It was a conversation that I felt like I just didn't know anybody who was going through what I was going through. I felt really isolated. I had 3 kids, all under the age of 6 or 7. And so it was just a really, really rough time. The church really wasn't moving in the spirit per se out there, and so I didn't really have anybody just to stop and pray with me and help me see the spiritual aspect of it. To me, it was just practically I was dealing with panic attacks, and I didn't know why. But God is good, and so he spoke to me, and he taught me how to get through it. He taught me that in the panic attack that I could lean on a scripture, that in a panic attack, if you've ever been through one, you can't really think about a lot. You have such a short attention span, and to recite something was really difficult. But he gave me the verse, Philippians 4:13, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And it's just such a simple verse, but it says so much. And for me, it became my anthem that I'm not going to die in this panic attack. I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to live. And why? Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so every time I had a panic attack, I just started saying it over and over again. And eventually they subsided. They got fewer. Eventually they went away. That was 20 years ago. So praise God, I was healed from them. And I will say, during that season, my eyes were purely on Jesus. So if we're back to the boat picture, well, we're in the boat. I'm at that point, I'm looking at Jesus, because every time I had that attack, I went right to him. The next part of the story I'm going to try to talk about without getting emotional. So 20 years have gone by. I haven't experienced that again. This last Sunday, 2 days ago, I'm on stage doing announcements, second service, and all of a sudden I felt like I just got gut punched. It just took my breath away. Those who heard said I gasped. And out of nowhere, I was in a full-blown panic attack on stage. And it was just humiliating. I am scared of public speaking, so just so you all know that. That's not uncommon for me to be scared up there. And this is like the equivalent of whatever your biggest fear is. For me, this is literally one of them. But he's helped me get through it every time. And I don't think I'm ever going to be a natural, or I'm going to be like really good at it, but God has given me strength to get through it each time. But on Sunday when it happened, I genuinely could not catch my breath. I just wanted to run. I wanted to run off that stage and never look back. And again, I hadn't experienced it in 20 years, so it was really humiliating and embarrassing, and it made me feel really weak that it happened in front of hundreds of people. And so I hit the end of the announcement, and I started to pray to close that out, and it was in that moment that I immediately felt calm. It was like, once I started talking to Jesus, it just went away, and I stopped. And you know, I didn't remember my anthem back in the day. If I could have, it's also hard when you're doing it when you're speaking to other people. But the Philippians 4:13, it didn't come right then like it should have. But I knew that I had to finish no matter what, and I was able to fight through it. But I'll tell you, if I could have prayed actually and been honest with Jesus at that moment, my prayer would have been, "Don't you care about me? Don't you see me? This is embarrassing. What am I going through right now?" As I drove home after church, I realized that the panic attacks was actually going to be part of my talk. It was on my paper. And then I almost started laughing, because I was like, anytime that you're preparing for a message, sometimes the Lord's going to let you walk through something that you have, you're preparing for something to talk about, and you're going to speak from experience. And so I realized that in that moment, that's what this was. It was a lot of just an attack from the enemy a little bit, but I also don't feel like it purposely. There's a part of me that actually feels like that I battled this because for this one time for sure in my life, God is using me to help other people. And even if it's something as simple as opening my home for a small group, there's freedom that's coming to young people who have been dealing with things. And just like Jesus was trying to get to the demoniac and the disciples were with him, there was healing after the storm. And so the good thing is as humiliating as Sunday was, I'm okay. And here I am talking to you just a few days later and fighting through. And I know that if I had one right now, I would just sit and pray. And so that's what we have to do. We have to learn from the storms to prepare us for the next one. The storm didn't win. There are other storms I don't really have time to go into that are on this list here. They weren't my storms, but I was in the boat with them, and I learned from them. And that's for them to talk about in their testimonies one day. Now, I want to share 5 things I've learned in the storm. Number 1, perspective. Perspective helps take our feelings out of it. If the disciples had had perspective on the boat, they would have not panicked, and they would have remembered that Jesus was on the boat with them. He was a miracle worker. I heard this analogy, and I thought it was really cool, and I'll try to explain it as if it is. But if you can imagine like a Christmas parade, you know there's lots of floats, and then the final float is the Santa Claus, right? Like that's the last float. And sometimes when you're on the ground level of a parade, you don't necessarily see all the different seasons and all that, the trials and the storms. And you can kind of imagine that each float is a storm or a season or a trial. And so when you're on the ground level, you can't see it all. But if you were to get elevated and go up on top of a roof and you could look down, well, now you can see it all, and you can see how you do get through it and you do get to the final part. And I think that's what perspective teaches us, is that we have to keep our eyes on Jesus and not focus on what's just in front of us, but to remember the past of what God has brought us through. That will also help us to get through our future. Number 2, dependence on God. When we depend on Him instead of our own self or circumstances, we can surrender all the storms to Him and trust in Him. Number 3, a firm foundation. I have learned to make Him my foundation. He's my anchor in the storm. When a boat is out at sea, and if you don't want it to move, you drop an anchor down. And then when you throw that anchor over the boat, it settles the boat and keeps it from moving. So that's the question, is Jesus your firm foundation? Number 4, resilience. Resilience, number 4. James 1-2-4. I read this verse the first time back at that church I had been at that I went through a lot of hard things. And honestly, I felt like the Lord gave me this verse as my life verse. And it has just stayed with me all this time. And it's, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. We will face trials, there's no question about it. We will face storms. And what does it do inside of us? The testing of our faith, it produces perseverance. In time, we become more mature and complete, lacking nothing. And I don't think that actually fully ever happens until we're standing face to face with God. We're never going to be fully mature and complete until that time. But each trial, it prepares us for the next one. Many trials I have gone through, I have literally gone through multiple times, because the Lord is like, I'm not letting you through this one until we get it worked out. So that can be something that we learn resilience in, and that's pretty much what I could just say for even panic attacks. Number 5, last one for this, is compassion and character. I have found the Lord has led me through many things that I didn't understand while I was going through it, until someone was in front of me struggling through the same thing. I have a little bit more mileage down the road, and I have a little bit more wisdom on the back end of some things that I could help someone else. And I've always said, even in the hardest things I've been through, if it could help one person, then it's 100% worth it. And so I would say for you the same thing. Whatever trials, whatever storms you've gone through, try to look at it as a blessing that you'll be able to help somebody else go through that. All right, next thing is practical ways to navigate a storm. It's the last part. Number 1, stabilize your ship. Oh, that was it. Stabilize your ship. Eat, sleep, get outside, and don't make big decisions when you're in a storm, if you can help it. 1 Kings chapter 19, we read the story of Elijah. Elijah goes through a really big storm. He had been on the run. There's been a lot going on against him, and he just gets to a point where he just needs to rest. And so God lets him have that time that he needs rest. And we need to eat. We need to rest. We need to take care of our bodies. We need to get our feet in the grass, move around, and feel good. And just, if you can, don't make big decisions while in a storm unless you are confident that God is leading you to that decision. Number 2, aim to the only thing that is sure, and that is Jesus Christ. Feelings are loud in storms. Just like I was talking about the boat when Jesus was on it in that storm, it was loud. Feelings can be loud. Stop and write down when you're in a storm, or read what God does say in His Word. What is true? What does God say about your identity? Hold on to that. Whatever you need to hear to help you fight through, go to His Word, pull that truth to help you fight through that storm. Number 3, narrow your focus. Sometimes we get overwhelmed by the longevity of the situation that we might be in, or not having the answers or the results that we really want. Don't ask, how will it work out? Instead, ask, what is my next faithful step? When Peter steps out of the boat in the story where Peter is on the water and he wants to walk to Jesus in that storm, he stepped one at a time towards Jesus. And the second that he looks away and he looks at the wind, that's when he begins to sink. So keep going to the Lord for help. Keep your focus on him. Number 4, let a few safe people in. Make sure they are steady and grounded believers. So many seasons of my life where things went really wrong, I did not have this. It is so important for you. Guard what's speaking into your life. What feeds you, grows you. If it's social media, music that isn't helping you, voices that speak fear into your life, instead of you increasing scripture or listening to worship music, godly counsel, those are the things that need to grow you. When I left my high school, when I left my husband, when I made a whole bunch of decisions that were not what God wanted, it was because I didn't have any of the above. Number 5, pray honestly. David shows us all over Psalms as he's in his storm. He prays honestly to God what he is feeling. And David was considered a man after God's own heart. Number 6, sometimes God will calm the storm. Sometimes he will strengthen you in the storm. Each account in Matthew, Mark, and Luke all share one thing in common on this story. It's when the disciples saw that Jesus calmed the 2 biggest forces, the wind and the sea, they immediately claim, he is the Lord. The storm taught them and strengthened them for the next one. So you will be strengthened in the storm. And the last thing I'll say is number 7, mark the lessons. Journal what you learn. Record answered prayers. Mark where you almost quit and you didn't, to see what the devil was trying to prevent. You guys have all been through storms and trials, but I promise you, and this isn't to be negative, but you're going to go through a lot more. And so knowing that, get it all written down so that you're prepared for the next one. Use what you've learned in the last storm to prepare you for the next one. Don't be stupid like me and keep going through the same lesson over and over again. The disciples saw him calm the wind and the waves, and they declared, he is Lord. The storm strengthened them for the next one, and he will do the same thing for you. If Jesus is in your boat, you may be shaken, but you will not sink. He's Lord. Send my message. Any questions?